Hey, good day, everyone, and welcome. My name is Alan Schimmel. I'm the CEO, editor in chief here at Techstrong Group, the people behind Techstrong TV and DevOps.com, Security Boulevard, Cloud Native now, Digital CXO, and our latest outlet, if you haven't checked it out, Techstrong.ai, because we had to put all that AI news somewhere. So do give them a check out. Welcome to DevOps Unbound. For those of you in the know, you already know that DevOps Unbound is a video series. We've been doing it over 2 years now, running twice a month, where we examine relevant topics in DevOps or related to DevOps, and kind of runs the gamut. And then every month or so, or 4 to 6 weeks, we do one of these episodes, what we call a DevOps Unbound roundtable or live panel. And the great thing about it is we love it because we have a live audience of people who get to drive our show today, right? We have a great panel here to discuss accessibility in software development and testing. But we really want you folks out here to tell us what you want to talk about and to contribute to the conversation. You could ask questions, you can make comments. Feel free even to just log in and tell us where you're from. It's always one of my favorite things on the internet is to see where everyone's coming from. And we see people from all over the world. Um, we actually have people from all over the world logged in today, so we'll get into that in a second. Anyway, I also want to mention that DevOps Unbound, all of them, both these live roundtables as well as our biweekly videos, are sponsored by our good friends at Tricentis, the worldwide leader in continuous testing. And we couldn't do this without the Tricentis folks because they really there's a woman named Lanier Norval who doesn't come on camera to show her face to you folks, but one day we'll get her on, and she helps us with everything from picking the topics to help searching far and wide for guests and making sure that this thing stays on track, along with our executive producer Jody Ashley. So many thanks to both of those women who aren't front and center on the camera. Before I introduce our panel, I mentioned chat and how you communicate. So for many of you, that's in the right-hand corner of your browser window. You'll see the big marker communication channel. If you look under chat public, obviously, if you type in there, everyone, including all of our attendees, will be able to see what you wrote. And so I wouldn't put anything too private in there. But feel free to use that chat. There is also private chat if you wanted to reach out to someone one on one with a private message. You feel free to do that as well, as long as it's related to the webinar here. I would hope this isn't it's not your your chat room hangout. And then beyond chat, though, there's another section of your communications window called Q&A. And in the Q&A section, that's really if you have a question that you want to bring directly to our panel, I will grab it from there and get it to our panel, and we will discuss it on our panel at the panel level. And again, everyone's free to put in chat. And it looks like we're already having some discussions or some questions coming in and comments. So thrilled to have that because when we've got a great audience, these are so much fun. Let me introduce you now, though, to our presenters today, to our panel members. We're not presenting. You won't see slideshows here. It's not that kind of event. Um, all right. So first, let me introduce you to a woman we've been lucky enough to have on our panels before, Paloma Oliveira. Paloma, you can say your last name better than I can. Why don't you introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. It's always a very pleasure to be here. My name is Paloma Oliveira. I am based in Berlin. I work at Sauce Labs as an open source developer evangelist. Um, I do see Ellen a little bit frozen. Not entirely sure if it's my internet. I hope not, and you can hear me well.
Yes, we hear you.
Um, cool. Um, Accessibility has been a big theme for me since I had an accident and I had to use a wheelchair for a little while. And I did a lot of experiment and studying, and I started doing having a group following the main accessibility rights movement, Nothing About Us Without It. So I had the privilege to work with a committee interfering directly in a museum in Mexico City. And I applied all that experience into a physical space to the digital space, now working with software and software testing. And I'm very happy to share those thoughts and that experience that I gather in Latin America, now in Europe, and now with you. I think most of you are based in US, and I'm very happy to be here exchanging all this knowledge.
Thank you, Paloma. Actually, I don't know if a majority are in the US. I think we usually run around 40 something percent, 41, 42% US, 20 something percent in Europe, and there's usually 14 or 15% from India, and then the rest of the world. So it's a pretty, global kind of audience. But Paloma, thank you for joining. Next up, I want to introduce you to Scott Gell. Scott, welcome, and maybe if you can talk a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Alan. It's a pleasure to be here. I am Scott Gell. I'm a web designer slash developer, sort of hybrid, I would say. And my background is originally in graphic design, but I've spent most of my career as sort of a hybrid engineer, designer, strategist. Early on, I was first exposed to web accessibility through working for my college. Actually, when I was still a student, I was starting to freelance and ended up locking myself into the job of redesigning their website, which as a college in the U.S. had accessibility requirements, obviously, that they cared to meet, and that was in 2003. So that was pretty early days, but that was my first exposure, and then that led to working with the Florida School for the Deaf and the Blind, which was a very eye-opening experience for me, as far as working with their students who used the website in a variety of ways with different assistive technology. And I feel like that really really set me on a certain path throughout my career to at least keep this at the forefront of my concerns. Most recently, I worked at Webpage Test, where we built webpagetest.org, which is mostly focused on performance, although it does some accessibility auditing as well. At least for the degree that you can check in an automated way, which can be helpful to some degree. And prior to that, I was at Filament Group for a number of years, where we helped a variety of clients, large publishers and retailers like Lego and Vineyard Vines, to ensure that their sites were usable to the broadest audience possible. So yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. Scott, I'm familiar with the Florida School for the Blind and Deaf. They do. It's a great school. What did you go to college up near there, or?
Yeah, I went to Flagler College,
Okay,
which is
sure.
St. Augustine, Florida, right nearby.
Yep.
So yeah, I just through that network, I happened to meet some folks who work over at the School for the Deaf and the Blind, and yeah, it was a really foundational project for me.
Cool. Welcome. Next
Thanks.
up, let me introduce you to Simona, and I'm going to do my best here. Simona Domastoka. Domastoka? Yeah?
Almost, Alan.
Almost.
Thank you.
All right.
Tomaszatowska, yes.
Domaskatoska. Okay.
Yes.
Simona, if you
So,
wouldn't mind introducing yourself.
yeah, sure, Alan. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Simona. I work as a product marketing manager for Tricentis. Tricentis is a global leader in continuous testing and quality engineering. And what we do is we help our customers increase the quality and speed of their application delivery processes. Besides my day-to-day job, I have a very deep passion for the topic of accessibility, very similar to Paloma. I had an accident about 3 years ago. I was also in a wheelchair. And I am very sensitive towards this topic. And then additionally, my brother had dyslexia, and he's one of the smartest people I know. Um, but obviously, for that reason, had troubles with accessing certain web content. And then additionally, I studied anthropology. I worked as an English teacher as well, and I briefly worked at the United Nations. So I'm very passionate about the topic of how we as humans access and use technology. And I believe that we should make that even more accessibility to diverse audiences. So I'm really excited to be here. I know we have a lot of experts, and yes, and thank you as well to all the audience members. So feel free to ask as many questions as possible.
Thank you and welcome, Simona. Our last panel member is Clive. And Clive, I haven't practiced your last name, so rather than butcher it, I'm going to ask you to say it. But Clive, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, imagine there's a W. It's Lowsby. Everyone says lose by or something like that, but it's Lowsby. So hi,
Lowsby.
thank you for very much for having me. I'm delighted to be here. My name's Clive Lowsby, passionate about website accessibility since 2006. Life-changing accident for myself and my partner back in '89 was part of our long journey on to becoming passionate about website accessibility. Access by Design, my company, is called that because we needed to prove to the world that you can be accessible and well designed. We built the web's first mobile friendly accessible website in 2011. I thought I'd be bigger than Microsoft, but there's a lot more to being successful in business than just coming up with a great product. And I was very lucky. I got the chance to do a TED talk on website accessibility last year. The thing that I'm really passionate about is helping others with their digital accessibility. I've got an amazing team of disabled people who will work with me on helping audit websites. And it's their lived experience that is what makes the difference to understanding how website accessibility really works. And I could go on about website accessibility for 20 years and still not run out of energy. Thank you again for having me.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for participating in our panel today, Clive. We do appreciate it. And then last but not least is not really a panel member. He's my co-host, as well as my partner here at Techstrong Group, CTO, Principal Analyst at Techstrong Research, my friend Mitchell Ashley, who's actually joining us today from Las Vegas, where he's attending SplunkConf. So Mitchell, welcome.
Great to be here, and love to hear from our panel today. User experience, though I'm not really an accessibility expert. I've done quite a bit of UI design, user experience design, and worked with human factors team, though that's not my specialty. Those are people that I've learned a great deal from. So I'm sure we'll learn a lot today from our panel. So thank you to everyone for joining, and great to be here with you, Alan.
Fantastic. So, guys, I do see some questions in the chat. We're going to get to them in just a moment. Feel free to put them in there or in the Q&A section. They don't have to be questions. They could be comments or topics you want us to touch on as well. But I wanted to start off by kind of baselining, right? I'm not a big compliance guy. I've been in cybersecurity for 25 years, and I think in many ways compliance was one of the worst things that ever happened to cybersecurity, because it set what I call a lowest common denominator of security. It's a relatively low bar that common sense tells you should be doing more than that. Now, with accessibility, it needed that at least a bar, right? Because there was no bar. It was the Wild West. And so different jurisdictions around the world have tried to tackle this. I want to see if we can't just kind of level set for the audience what our panel sees as the primary accessibility and accessibility compliance regulations, rules, statutes, whatever you want to call them, that we live by. So Simona, I know you've done some. I'm sure Clive, you have these off the top of your head as well. But Simona, if you wouldn't mind kicking off with kind of a quick recap.
Sure. Yeah, so legislation is a huge topic. As you all know, there are about 40 countries worldwide that have some form of digital access laws. For instance, Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act. We have the American Disabilities Act. And obviously in Europe, we have the European Accessibility Act. This law is currently being revised is in draft mode, but it will get implemented and enforced by 2025. And then, one point I just want to highlight when it comes to legislation is that I think a lot of organizations worldwide and just people in general do not have the best level of awareness when it comes to legislation. They don't know that certain laws exist and what that actually means for their organizations. But what we are certainly witnessing is a heightened level of interest on the topic. In fact, I think there was a Gartner report recently published. They're getting 20% more inquiries about what is accessibility, how do they implement it into their applications. So we're seeing this momentum. Maybe it's the golden age for accessibility. I don't know, but it's certainly, laws and regulations play a huge role there. And I just also like to highlight the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. This has also played a really major role in bringing more attention to how different states adopt digital access laws.
Excellent. I'm sorry, my Apple Watch was buzzing me there. Um, I think that's a decent kind of clip at it. We were talking before we went on camera. The Americans Disabilities Act, I think, was from 2003 or five, something like that. And it's discouraging, quite frankly, that we haven't seen a major update or significant updates to that. The EU regulations, which I guess will go fully into effect in 2025, I think will force most of the world to up to that level anyway. I hope. Clive, you're a real, I consider a real expert on it. What, anything that we've left out that we should make the audience aware of there in terms of compliance?
No, I think you nailed it. It's depressing that the WCAG guidelines were drawn up in 1999. So that's a long, long time ago for people to be going, website access, what? Which is kind of what happens when you start mentioning things like website accessibility, which is depressing. It's educational. The biggest shift, and you've absolutely nailed it in what you've said, it is the European Accessibility Act in 2025. That's the unstoppable train. And that's going to have the same effect on the world, I believe, that GDPR did in terms of the way. Now, I'm not a fan of the cookie law because the cookie law set website accessibility back 10 years. But don't get me started on that. However, let's put that to one side. And Europe redeems itself. I'm very pro-European. Europe will redeem itself by making sure that this act, which actually applies to anybody who does business that connects with Europe. And it's not just website accessibility, it's accessibility across the board. So I'm really excited about it. And I think that is going to be the game changer. But that is just under 2 years away. Given how long it takes people to adapt, particularly larger companies, I think it's going to be interesting to see how late everybody leaves it.
I don't disagree. Guys, if you don't mind, John in our audience asked around a specific topic very early on, just when we first started. And I want to make sure we hit it head on for him. And he's specifically looking for considerations regarding color blindness, color vision, I guess or color vision deficiencies, I guess is the PC term for it, in creating artifacts associated with software development. And this is something, I'll be honest, this hit me personally home. One of my partners actually was colorblind in a previous company I had worked at. And I never realized what frankly, a pain it is for people who can't distinguish between a red button and a green button or different color buttons that don't have clear text on them. But Scott, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you to take the lead on this one.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I can speak to it as, foremost as a designer. One of the primary concerns in selecting color palettes for, say, information visualization is to make sure that the colors in, say, a pie chart or something like that, to give an example, are distinguishable from one another. And there are a number of great resources online that can help you choose color palettes that work well, or assess the colors that you're using to make sure that they're accessible to a variety of different disabilities.
Yep. I know, Paloma, you were nice enough, I think in chat, you already put a link to an article on this, and Mitchell's put up some stuff. So John, I hope we've had it in there. When I look at the accessibility issue, guys, around accessibility and design, to me, there's two pieces of it. One is an awareness thing, right? Making sure our developers, designers, architects are aware of what best practices are. Right? I don't want to say aware of what the rules and regs are. I hope we exceed those. What are best practices around accessibility, and then therefore they can incorporate that into their work. But then the second piece of it, like everything else around building software and deploying software, is before we set it loose on the world, testing it, making sure that it is in fact compliant at a very low, at the very least, or that it is accessibility friendly, if you will. And I don't think, and those are two distinct areas, right? That I don't think the same. You need these two distinct areas. Simona, you're with Tricentis Testing Company. What specific test regarding or around accessibility are we seeing out there, right? What are people kind of using for this?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's so many different types of ways to test an application's accessibility. What we recently implemented at Tricentis is automated web accessibility. So whatever tests you have created for your applications, you don't need to recreate new ones. You just run those. And as you execute those tests, it will check against different WCAG guidelines and requirements. For instance, are the page titles distinguishable? Is the color contrast okay? Is the dynamic content synchronization working? Are the headings and landmarks hierarchy well displayed? And another important aspect of accessibility is testing whether the application can be read and understood by assistive technology. So if you look at people with visual impairments or blind people, they really heavily rely on screen readers. And in order for screen readers to call out certain elements on a page, for instance, this is a table, you have to click on this button. That's what blind people hear as they are using a web application. That screen reader has to understand the object. And to understand the object, it needs to properly identify it. But the problem is that the way that developers are writing code today, perhaps those objects are not distinguishable. It could be written as a div. And that is why it is important that, a lot of developers already have awareness. And what they're doing is that when they're writing code now, they employ something called ARIA semantics. ARIA semantics are added onto those into the coding language to precisely help screen readers call out those elements. And so that's what we're trying to focus on. We're trying to help embed. So we have automated testing tools that help identify ARIA semantics and also check against all the different WCAG guidelines when, testing different types of applications. So I hope that answers the question. Yeah.
Paloma, so you're with Sauce, obviously, the huge library. Anything in addition to what Simone is talking about?
Yeah, well, it's a lot to unpack in like a very short moment that we have been talking about. We could take worlds out of it. From the context that Simona is adding, it's fundamental not to use not to rely on some tools. It is an effort from everyone that starts, as Scott was mentioned, from the design. And accessibility is a topic that everyone should be involved and be part of our workflow. In Sauce Labs, we talk about a lot shifting left, that meaning from the earliest stages, starting making sure you're testing, but from the earliest stages, not through at the end where you just go through your test check. Some tools that does help to be more practical here for our for the people who are participating here. It's of course DECU. I think they are the biggest one that offer free available testing tools for almost all the frameworks around there. You can use your Dev Inspector directly. You can use integrated as a library on a Vue application or the React application. This is all free and available. You can just scan, but that alone won't do the work, because as Simona was saying, you need to understand the context. So there's some tools like Events is a company which we actually have an article saying that it's 3 lines of code that can make sure it visually test your web page, understanding how the things are displayed on the page, and they can relate better with all the hardware around, that is a keyboard, a reader, or keyboard accessible, or screen readers, or other hardware as well. So it should, I of course would defend that should be automated, that should not add time to your work, but that should be integrated on your workflow. And with those tools, they're so easy to use now. You just have to remember to add it to your workflow and make sure it reminds you. And those tools, they are super nice. Like in DECU, if you just do the easiest one, just the Dev Inspector, it will tell you it's missing an area and it will explain you what it is and give you an example. So you just basically will copy paste. It's easy as that.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah.
Anyone comment? No?
Yeah, I could add a little bit to great points by Simona and Paloma. I would say that there was a mention of ARIA and using that, and there is also just the general idea of starting with standard semantic HTML and trying to exhaust as much as you can the use of standard elements before moving on to ARIA, which can help you sort of add meaning to markup that may not be meaningful without it, right? So if you're building, say, a form or something, and you have an opportunity to select one item out of many, ideally you'd reach for a select element before trying to build such an element yourself, because it's quite complicated to do that well and in an accessible way using ARIA. Although it's possible, it's still sort of this pattern of starting with the fundamentals in HTML can get you a long way and keep you out of trouble.
Yep. I'm glad you brought that up, Scott, because when Paloma mentioned shift left, I think it was Paloma mentioned shift left. To me, that we see a similar issue, quite frankly, in DevSecOps, right? For a long time, everyone said developers don't care about security. They just want to get code done. They want to finish their projects. And so how do we make them better security aware? How do we make them more security attuned, if you will? I think to a certain extent, it's the same thing when we come to accessibility. Many developers that I've dealt with in my career, accessibility almost becomes like a caboose on the train, right? The end of the train, where first I'm going to write my code, I'm going to design my interface, my UIs and so forth. And then, oh yeah, am I accessibility compliant? Let me see. Have I done anything to help people maybe with red-green deficiencies or something else? And it's like added on, right? I think part of the issue is, and Scott, you mentioned it, when you were in college, you were exposed to it.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that may be an exception rather than the rule. I mean, Clive, your whole your business is built around this, right? How do we make accessibility more grab more top of mind share for developers so that it's not the caboose on the train, it's not the afterthought. It gets put in right in the beginning.
Okay, so it's it actually is a really easy answer, and that's just speaking from experience. You need to go through the pain, the real pain of having an audit from not me, but from somebody who actually uses disabled people, because you can automate anything as much as you like, but it's only going to go so far. I've just finished an audit on a portal that actually was pretty clean in terms of testing it against WCAG. I let my team loose on it, and they're not looking for problems. They're just using it in the way that they use it. The three of them are blind. One uses can't use her hands, so she uses voice recognition. Dragon is a bit of a challenge, but the point is, when they find these errors, they just happen naturally, and usually they're quite big ones. Once they've seen the videos and they actually understand not just the nice little cute screenshot, but they actually watch and understand the pace at which disabled people use websites, and the fact that it's not them that's slowing them down, but it's their assistive technology fighting against the website that's given little thought to them. It's only when they see that pace and they understand how painful it is, and then they see just why a tiny little thing that they've just kind of not overlooked, like this, just something as simple as link order or whatever, and then they suddenly notice that little thing there and that empty radio button there, that's being read out every single time, and then suddenly you realize the compound effect of what you're doing. Once you've done that and you realize your mistakes, and this isn't about beating people up, because we've all said at the beginning it's about education. Once you've had that experience, and the most common thing that people say to me is, well, we're not going to do that again, because we get it. Everybody here has got, or most people who are involved in accessibility have got either a lived experience or know somebody, or whether it's a permanent or temporary, they've been disabled. Same with me. If we hadn't had a car crash in '89, we would have just been another web design agency like anybody else. So we've all got reasons why. That's why I don't get, I understand why people don't get it. But once they've had that and they realise, they're never going to look back. And that's why I get so fired up, because it is a one-way ticket. Nobody is going to go back to making an inaccessible website once they know and they see why and they realise. And that's why I love it, because every website that agency does will be better and better and better. And that's how you change the world. Everything else is secondary. And do you know what? Sorry, I sound like I'm on a platform here. There are a lot of disabled people. They are the biggest underrepresented, underemployed sector on the planet, and I pay my guys top dollar because of what they bring that even I, with 15 years of experience, cannot bring. Yeah, and there are so many of them, and they just need to be on the end of a Zoom call with a computer. Yeah, that's what every developer should be doing. And honestly, that's how you really learn. Everything else is really important, and everything that's been set up to here is absolutely critical, and I would endorse every single thing. But at the end of the day, you don't know until you've got disabled people actually using it. And they would love to be involved. My team are absolutely brilliant. And around the world, that's what people want to do.
Alan, I think that's the counterbalance to the compliance side that you mentioned, sort of the negative aspect.
A low bar.
Almost everybody in our panel, and I commented about this in chat, of personal experiences that have fueled or drive passion around accessibility and design. And I don't know if that's an attribute for everybody who specializes in this field, but it certainly is. It is kind of a calling about working in accessibility.
I agree. My only, and Clive, I appreciate your passion. My only regret is that's a very expensive way to get people aware, right? That it costs car accidents and other mishaps. until it hit, or to you or a loved one, or at least someone until it gets real for you, right? And that's I I wish there was a better way of more, but to really make it profound like that, to really make you feel it. Unfortunately, I think you need that sort of crucible
May
to
I?
come out. Yes, please.
It's just that I am very enthusiastic about the theme, and I'm very I'm very positive about it. To think that I heard a lot people wanting to have a statistic like, why am I going to build that? Like, we don't have a client that it's I don't know, have dyslexia. Why am I going to build for that? And my take is that people will not use it if you don't build for them. And while we're really focusing on the specific bodies, we will have to pay this high price that is either having a personal experience of meeting someone with that. While if we start thinking the other way around, as decision makers or people, this is why everyone needs to be involved. People who are dealing with the product and the design, they need to start thinking this is not an add-on, this is the base, because I'm including something that will be better for everyone. That's it. An accessible product makes it better for absolutely everyone. And disability is a gigantic topic. We're talking about vision, motor, elderly people, children, different languages. So it is such a big topic. But if we always try to broaden our perspective of the user and always focusing in we need to do that better for a flawless experience for our user. What do we need? And then we just make people come in and we have them on board, and that becomes normal. So I'm very positive about changing the future now with that line of thought.
Yeah,
I
I've
think it
experienced
is.
that.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Scott.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to say I've experienced that, not only in accessibility, but just sort of in a broader sense of how you can expand the audience of whatever you're building just by making it work more broadly on different types of devices and different browser support, things like that. We've had clients who say, we've looked at our browser stats and we don't really have many people on mobile devices, so why would we focus there? And perhaps the bigger question is, why don't you have people on mobile devices yet? Well, maybe your site doesn't work very well on mobile, and once you do, you'll encourage a broader use of your site because it suddenly works better for those people who are trying to use it. So it's sort of a fulfilling circumstance in that way. I think just the same with accessibility.
Could I just
Sure.
add a quick word to that? For the first 10 years probably of the business, I spent a lot of time at networking events talking about accessibility, but I realized that basically business owners, unless they've got a personal experience with disability, they only care about the bottom line. And therefore, I would just talk about the business case, because the business case for accessibility, like Scott's just alluded to, with mobile phones, it's overwhelming. The purple pound, as it's called in the UK, we're talking about large amounts of money that people have to spend on goods and services, and they're going to spend it on those goods and services. If they can't spend it with you because your website's not accessible, they're going to go somewhere else. But again, it is so obvious. We all get that. And when the penny drops with business owners, they get it. But they're put off by cost, or they're frightened by cost, or they think hassle, legislation, red tape, whatever it's viewed at. And I don't know how you get over that except just keep putting the message out. And with the European thing, that is going to be a big game changer. But of course, by then, everyone's going to be rushing to get it done. And the danger with that is that, as anybody who's worked in development knows, the minute you rush stuff, that's when mistakes start getting made. And we could end up with a real quagmire of half-broken websites that try to comply and end up being worse than ever. So what is the answer? I have no idea, apart from things like this and keep spreading the message.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of what I was alluding to earlier, Clive, which is, spreading this message by one injured person at a time and their connections is a painful way of doing it, right? But if you can make it a business case with dollars and cents and incentivize people, to do it, it's a lot smoother. We've got a question in the Q&A, and I'm committed to answering our Q&A questions promptly. Lynn asks, can you share some best practices or tools that help ensure accessibility is addressed effectively during development and testing? So I think we mentioned some of the Tricentis tools, Source Labs, those are more testing. Scott, Clive, you guys kind of represent the developer point of view here. Anywhere we can point people to a good list of tools and or best practices around this.
Yeah, maybe if I could just start. I know that we've probably mentioned WCAG guidelines, but as a starting point, I think it's quite approachable to read those guidelines and get a sense of the things that you should care about when you're starting a project, rather than when you're all done and looking at it and trying to figure out if it's accessible or not. Many of those, they're broken down into just broad guidelines of, is content perceivable, operable, understandable, robust? And you can dig into each of those sections and get sort of bullet points, at least at the first level, that give you a sense of what does that mean, And it doesn't have to be very complicated when you're setting out to build a page, things like making sure there's alternative text for audio and images, making sure that pages have titles, that your heading usage is good. Color contrast, we already mentioned that. Making sure that links have good naming, so it's not just click here. It's actually describing where you're headed, because a lot of people navigate a page by listening to the links or the headings. So if you think about your page as sort of something that might be experienced maybe in a less linear way, like you're sort of looking at it as an outline and looking at the headings first and breaking it down that way, you can start to think about it that way a little bit more. Can you tab through the page? Things like that. As far as best practices go, I think those guidelines really help you on the right path from the start. I can let Clive add to that.
Well, I was just going to add, Scott, I mean, it's brilliant. W3.org has got pretty much everything as a starting point. It's a great website. I think the WebAIM does their audit every year of the top 1 million websites on the web and where they stand in terms of accessibility. And I think we are now down to the low figure of only 96.1% of websites failing the basic accessibility states. And given that means 230 million live websites, it's important to keep expectations low, because everything that Scott has just said, I would say brilliant, because that if you can just remember to put an alt tag when an image is there, if you can just remember to think about the fact that how would that work in the same way that you would design a website, hopefully now, that would work for somebody with a mobile phone, you would think, well, how would that work with somebody who's got cognitive issues, might be dyspraxic, might be dyslexic? Maybe we need to offer color contrast, things like that and offer different text sizes, rather than expecting the person who has got the browser to know how to do that. Because people who use websites can have plugins that will do these things for them, but they might not be aware of it. So little things you can control with CSS to allow you to change text size, color contrast, do a plain text version and change the color contrast on that as well. This is all kind of stuff that's kind of key. And once you start doing it, it becomes your standard.
Maybe I just want to add something, if that's possible. We haven't spoken a lot about the use cases, because I fully agree with what you're saying, Clive, right? That we should be doing this by now, right? But when I speak to a lot of our customers, it's all about speed. It's about bottom line. They need to get applications out the door as quickly as possible. But having said that, we're getting a heightened number of customers, particularly in the public sector, that are asking us, hey, we need to comply with WCAG guidelines. How can we test this? Can you support us? So I don't see it as so detrimental. Rome wasn't built in a day. I think it takes a lot of awareness, a lot of evangelism. And I think that compliance is critical to this, and fines and laws. In fact, I think in 2020, there were about 1,000 different laws that were issued in relation to accessibility. Fines can go up to as high as 50,000 to 100,000, depending on the severity of the issue. And that does make organizations a bit more kind of to implement these measures. So I think in the public sector, it's really relevant. Public sector organizations, if you think of government websites or submitting your annual tax declaration, accessing your healthcare records, or think about banks, right? Paying bills, or what about electricity bills? What about retail? What about food delivery? Or ride sharing? There's so many different types of applications, and I think it would be good to discuss this a little bit, because it really depends on your business, how mission critical is the application, how much is it the face of the business, and therefore the need to implement accessibility in the application. I think that's really, really critical, because what is the application that you're building? What is it used for? That will also dictate the extent to which organizations embed accessibility practices in their, development and testing.
Yeah, great points. I mean, I think you alluded to it, but more and more I hear from even small businesses in the U.S. who are concerned about accessibility because they're either personally facing legal concerns about the accessibility of their own website, or they've heard about colleagues who are facing consequences or a lawsuit. And for better or worse, that often is the way that people come into learning about accessibility. And there are similar concerns in performance. How do we incentivize these things? Google had page ranking for a little while that was factoring in mobile friendliness to try to expose sites more and more to the idea that you need to be creating something that's faster and mobile accessible. And I think there's lots of opportunities in accessibility for those same sort of less legal incentives to come in. But better or worse, I mean, a lot of companies are being exposed to this now, and they're asking, where do I go from here? How do I ensure that my site is going to be accessible from a legal standpoint? There's great resources for it. We mentioned a couple of them already. I think Clive, really nailed it on the point of, actually working with disabled people. There's no substitute for that. I can recall a number of clients, especially when I was working at Filament Group, who hired consultants, blind users, various disabilities, and I just cannot recall a more eye-opening experience to me for, we already tried to make a site accessible, and we did pretty good. But the things that we discovered by watching someone who actually uses a screen reader use their site, and really, really practical things that make it better. There's no substitute for that. And there are plenty of people that you can reach out to hire to help you do that work.
I think that's a very interesting and salient point, Scott. Look, if you don't have this expertise in-house, there are companies, providers who you can outsource this to, right? Who can help you. Clive, I'm assuming your company's such a company that does do that kind of stuff.
Yes, we did. You mentioned about lawsuits earlier. We helped a public organisation in New York over Christmas that was actually already had been unfortunately sued. I just wanted to touch on very briefly a wonderful experience I had, best one I've ever had, when working with the Scottish Parliament, which we've got over in the UK. And they were developing a new tool. The agency had been told in no uncertain terms, make sure it's accessible. So they said to us, can you please get involved? So we were actually involved from the beginning, because it's always left till afterwards, usually after the website's gone live. It was at the very beginning, the first meeting, there wasn't even a design. We just looked at the tools and we said, this is good and this is bad. Then they came away with the design at the next meeting, just a flat design, went through it, things to look out for. Third one, a wireframe. So, and then they went away. Oh no, we had one actually, yeah, we had a working prototype, and that was it. It went away for 4 months, came back and said, can you have a look? And get your team involved. And it was brilliant. And I'm not saying that was down to me. It was done with any consultant who knew, who knew what they were doing. But the fact is, because they got that in at the beginning, their cost was much less, but their remedial work, there was still some after my team had kind of worked through it, was so much lower. So, I mean, but that sadly has been one example in all the years that I've been doing this. But it's an example that shows that it works. Because actually, if you know about the bottom line, isn't it much better to get it done right from the beginning and not have to pay for, a ton of money at the end? It's just getting that message across. I don't care about people's design. I don't tell them, I'm not a designer. I'm not there to tell them whether I think something looks nice or not. I'm not here to tell them what to do. My job is to reassure them. All I care about is accessibility. And if their design issue is obviously an accessibility issue because of color contrast, because of whatever it may be, that's the only thing I would be involved in. And when they understand that, and the key is the designers, it's the agencies, because as I said at the very beginning, when they've seen the videos, they don't make that particular mistake again. And that's the way you truly change, because they're the ones who, at the end of the day, like Scott, are building these websites.
Mm-hmm.
And if they get it, eventually it will just happen.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone raises their hand and says, I want to build or design a website or an application that's not accessible friendly, right? Or inhibits people from its use. No one does that, right?
No.
Everybody wants to make their website available to the widest audience possible. But understanding what it takes to do that is that's a different story. And I think that therein lies the crux of it. Guys, we're coming up on the top of the hour here. I wanted to announce our we always give out $425 Amazon gift cards here. And the winners this week, and our team will get you out your gift cards, are Nina C. I can't read that last name from me. Is it Florio G, Matt H, and Christina T. So no one on the panel is eligible. You guys don't win, but to our 4 lucky winners, enjoy the gift cards. Buy something nice on Amazon, and we can go from there. Guys, I'm going to give everyone a chance to wrap up with some final thoughts. But let me just warn you, we only have about 7 or 8 minutes. So, and there's 5 of you, not counting me. So we'll go in reverse order of how we started. Clive, I'm going to ask you to go first.
Okay, it's if you want an introduction to the concept of website accessibility, that starting point, watch my TED talk. This isn't about me. It's not about my ego. It's just about it's a chance to explain in very simple terms what it actually is. I thought I was going to do something quite technical. I realized that people really needed to start from the basics. And if you can just remember a couple of things that you can do every time you upload a picture to Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or your website, just put a line describing what the image is. Just that. Just remember to do that can make a tremendous difference. I think I've been absolutely privileged to share the platform with these guys here. But when you meet people throughout who have got this passion for accessibility, it gives you hope that message will carry on spreading. So thank you very much for having me.
Clive, you've added so much. Thank you for coming. I'm trying to remember reverse order. I think it was Simone was next.
Yeah. So I just wanted to end on the note that, we always think that accessibility only concerns those that may be blind or visually impaired or have hearing impairments or so on and so forth. But actually, it could be any one of us, right? we all have are experiencing some type of temporary or situational conditions. In fact, I think Microsoft conducted a research that tells us, you know, you could have an ear infection, somebody could be in a very loud bar, you could be in a taxi. There's all sorts of different types of situations where we could be in as human beings, and that really prevents us from accessing technology. So really, it's not just about a very small portion. The number is much larger. So we need to think about everybody here. And that's why it's really important to embed digital accessibility early on into the software development lifecycle. So that's just one thing I wanted to end on. Thank you, everybody, for your attention.
Thank you. Next up is Scott.
All right. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me here. I guess I would just say that it helps to be and try to remain curious about the technology that you're using and whether or not it's designed with accessibility in mind. Particularly, I think in web development, there's a trend of the most popular approaches sort of sometimes treading ahead of things that are necessarily accessible. You know, for a long while there, JavaScript frameworks were, you know, applying certain patterns to the user interface that were not really built with accessibility in mind. And it took some time, long after they were widely adopted, before those patterns were stabilized and made to be much more accessible. So I would say, you know, stay curious about the tools and accessibility. The tools that you're using, and there's great resources out there that can help you verify that they're accessible.
Fantastic. Paloma, how about you?
Yeah, I want to end it up with a very famous phrase, allegedly from Werner Myers, that says, diversity is being invited to the party, but inclusion is being asked to dance. So every time we think about accessibility, invite person with disabilities to this dance and create it together. That's for me the main key, and turn that into shifting left, not just to a checkbox, but the tools will just help you facilitate. But if you don't have the awareness, you will not even understand what you're looking for.
I that was a great use of that quote as well. I agree with you. And thank you, Paloma, for coming on today again, as always. Mitch, why don't you bring this home?
You know, regulations force change, but they don't force good design. So while they're helpful, it's not the total solution. I recall back to when I was first introduced to usability labs in the late 90s. This idea of doing testing for usability, of course, now with accessibility. There's no substitute for the value of spending time with people and observing how they use your product or your website, your app, because guess what? They use it in a lot of ways you never anticipate, and you learn so much, whether you're in the early design phase or you already shipped a product. So find ways to take advantage of that, whether you have a formal lab or formal program, or you're just someone who observes somebody using your mobile app at Starbucks. Go kind of observe and watch them use it, or talk to them about it. Learn from everyone, especially folks that were designing for accessibility.
Love it. Thank you. All right. Just real quick, I'm going to remind everyone there was a survey link in the chat. If you can fill out the survey, because it helps us make these better. We understand what you like, what you don't like, what you'd like to see more of, what you'd like to see less of. So please take a moment to fill that out. Again, many thanks to Tricentis for sponsoring our DevOps Unbound series. Infinity thanks to Jody Ashley and Lanier Norville for helping us produce DevOps Unbound, you know, every other week, in and out, getting them done. And Mitchell, enjoy the rest of SplunConf. But for now, hey, this is Alan Schimmel. You've just watched another DevOps Unbound. We'll see you soon on another show. Bye-bye.